Look at Africa's business this hour with Penina Karibe. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up in business this hour. China-Africa Trade in Focus as Investment Forum opens in Beijing. The China-Africa Investment Forum has begun in Beijing, with the focus being trade and investment between China and Africa. Officials at the forum say that cooperation between China and Africa is stronger than ever before, and that China plans to beef up investment in the continent as more Chinese companies consider moving abroad. CCTV's Shia Sisi reports.
Applause for the bright future in China-Africa relations. President of the China Society for World Trade Organization Studies and former Vice Minister of Commerce, Sun Zhengyu, has offered his congratulations on the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. He said China welcomes and supports Africa's efforts for future cooperation.
Africa is now an emerging destination for foreign investment. Chinese investment in Africa has reached $20 billion, and China plans to increase that figure. Sino-African economic cooperation has been a great boost to Africa's development, as well as that of the global economy.
The event has attracted renowned economists and leaders from Africa. One of the highlights of the forum is the performance of the aviation and tourism industries, which has spearheaded China-Africa trade in services. Officials believe bilateral trade in services will be expanded to other fields like finance, insurance, and legal consulting, which will benefit both sides. The South African ambassador to China says African countries are in the process of diversifying their economies and has expressed his confidence in the future of China-African cooperation.
African countries are also taking serious steps to diversify their economies away from reliance on export of primary commodities, and are seeking to increase the size of their manufacturing and service sectors.
Experts say the face-to-face communication will help further mutual understanding and explore opportunities for trade and investment cooperation. China and Africa maintain a good trade momentum in recent years against the backdrop of a slow recovery of the global economy. China is currently Africa's #1 trading partner, and the two are aiming to further expand and deepen their economic relationship, which is a model for the win-win cooperation among developing economies. CCTV, Beijing.
To South Africa, where the rand plummeted on Wednesday and reached 4-year records against the US dollar, touching 9.85 to the greenback during the course of trading. Following Wednesday's depreciation, the South African currency is down over 8% for the month, and we keep watching for its performance this Thursday. Chief economist at the Standard Bank Group, Gulam Balim, says that it is unlikely to improve anytime soon.
In some respect, the rand has been compromised by concerns surrounding just general institutional failure in South Africa, and also heightening and militant labor relations. And of course, a becalmed situation would go some way towards tempering the rand's slide. And in that respect, certainly, not just the government, but also the businesses involved, civil society, the labor unions and government, in a form of a social compact, can work towards, as I suggest, becalming the situation.
The African Development Bank Conference entered its 4th day in Marrakech, Morocco on Thursday, with a focus on Africa's structural transformation. The overriding focus of this year's event is how to sustain and scale up Africa's economic growth to benefit citizens in a more transformative way. CCTV's Rama Nyang is there, now brings us up to speed with the latest developments. Rama, it's good to have you with us. So what are the latest developments coming out of this conference today?
Well, Penina, the conference so far has focused primarily on 3 key issues. Improving governance is a session on that going on right now, but earlier in the morning we talked about 2 key issues: infrastructure financing and financial inclusion. On infrastructure, there have been calls by the monarch of Morocco, King Mohammed VI, to increase the amount. He's essentially made a very strong call for countries to invest in the Africa 50 infrastructure fund that the AfDB is developing, and it should be deploying sometime later on. Also, however, a very fascinating discussion on financial inclusion. You will, of course, recall that the bulk of the African economy, most of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP, is bound up very strongly in agriculture. In several countries, it's the largest employer. But there's a very interesting dissociation between the agricultural sector and that of formal finance, and that has been a key concern in the sessions so far today.
So, Rama, let's talk about mobile money systems, because African economies have been at the forefront of establishing these. What are the main concerns that are coming out about these systems when you talk about deploying them?
Well, one of the key issues that emerged today were actually two key ones. Regulation of the said product is a key case in point. Kenya keeps on coming up over and over again as a sort of benchmark, the SI unit for success in implementation of mobile money, be it from a consumer perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and even from the perspective of managing inflation. And that question came up from Nigeria. The central bank is looking at the mobile money systems and thinking, to what extent will mobile money affect inflation in the country? Now, general conventional economics will tell you that if you increase the velocity of cash circulating around an economy, inflation does tend to go up. But the example from Kenya proves that you can manage that to some extent. The question, of course, is whether or not you can take what the Kenyans have done and then implement that in Nigeria, and what results you might actually get. That is a key question right here. Of course, the question of data as well comes into place, because for you to extend financial inclusion through mobile money, you need a certain amount of infrastructure. Now, the fact that mobile access across sub-Saharan Africa has literally exploded over the last decade makes that easier to some extent. But the question, of course, that most regulators are asking themselves, especially at this forum, is do you regulate before or after the fact? What the Kenyans did was to regulate after the fact, left the product loose into the market, see what happens, and then tweak your regulatory factors, your policies and your regulations to match the loopholes that you actually see and plug those. Other countries, however, would much rather prefer to regulate before the fact. The problem with that, according to the policymakers we've spoken to here, is that you tend to stifle innovation. And therefore, for example, the argument being used is as if, say, about 5 or so years ago, if the Central Bank of Kenya had decided to agree with the banks and essentially stifle M-Pesa, would it be the success it will be today? Probably not. But the conversation on that is ongoing right here at the African Development Bank's annual meeting in Marrakesh in Morocco. We'll have more details for you right here at 1700 GMT.
Indeed, Rama, we'll catch up with you then. That's CCTV's Rama Yang joining us live from Marrakech in Morocco. And speaking about money, let's take a look at how trading so far is going. Major bourses here in Africa that we're tracking for you this hour. The Nigeria All-Share Index at the moment in the red, 0.07%. Going down to the JSE in the green, just about 1 percentage point, 4,503.91 points. The Nairobi Securities Exchange as well in the green, 0.39%. And finally, the EGX in the green as well, 0.20%. We'll have plenty more for you at 1700. Beatrice is back to you for now.